A lot of individuals, the reason they have this problem is because they're afraid of sex. And of course, one of the reasons they're afraid of sex is because you're not supposed to talk about sex. Isn't that the way it is?
Not on the 6th floor.
Not on the 6th floor. You're not supposed to talk about it. On the 6th floor, you're not supposed to talk about it. In the United States, I mean, we really don't talk about it. We're really kind of sexually repressed. And if you go around the world, if you wander around the world, if you go to Europe, you see a lot of nudity in Europe. You go to Japan, you see a lot of really strange and interesting things in Japan. Different. They have a different concept of what sexuality is. And for that reason, of course, we don't talk about it nearly as much as other individuals do. And of course, where did psychology come from? It started with Freud. Why in the world was Freud even talking about problems? He was talking about problems because of sexual repression. And of course, there was a lot of sexual repression in his time, Victorian Europe. So we have, and we've gone beyond that now. But there are still individuals that don't want to talk about sex, or afraid of having intercourse. What was I reading today? I was reading something about Katharine Hepburn. Katharine Hepburn. She had sex when she was in college, and she didn't like it, so she decided she didn't want to have sex anymore. And so she was kind of negative about sexual things. And if you have ever seen any of her movies, there's no nudity in her movies. People are really have a lot of clothes on, as obvious as they seem. Even if there are other movies with women less, or men less dressed, nobody was ever in a bathing suit in any of her movies. I mean, it was really kind of an interesting situation. So she was really kind of negative about these things. And so people, even today, people have really interesting ideas about these things. I guess maybe it's not as bad as it used to be, but of course this can be a problem. Vaginismus is where the muscles are too tight, so we try to treat them with relaxation therapy, with general counseling. We give them Kegel exercises. Kegel exercises have to do with the area between your anus and your if you're female, or your vaginal area, and if you're male, it's between your testicles and your anus. There is a group of muscles down there that allow you to have a bowel movement. If you tighten, that's what Kegel exercises is where you tighten and loosen that area of your body, and they're known as Kegel exercises. They can strengthen that area of your body. And it can make it more flexible, that area more flexible. And these are known as Kegel exercises. Success rates reported for these interventions range from 83% to 100% at 1-year follow-up of the individuals. Usually you can fix these people just by getting them to talk about sex. If they can say the word penis, then maybe then it starts to they start to change the way that they think about these things. So sexual repression can cause these problems. Other sexual dysfunctions, substance medication-induced sexual dysfunction occurs when there is a significant dysfunction in sexual function that results from intoxication, withdrawal, or exposure to medication or other substance capable of producing the symptoms. The reality is that there are a lot of medications that really mess you up. As far as sex is concerned, not everything is a Viagra, Levitra, or Cialis. Those are the erectile dysfunction medications. If you take blood pressure medicine, it can lower your sex drive. If you shoot up with heroin, the probability of being able to have sex is fairly remote. If you're a drinker, and we talked about this in the last class, if you're a drinker, then it raises your it lowers your testosterone level and raises your estrogen level. So if you have a male that is a heavy drinker, then he very slowly will turn into a non-male. That was a nice way to say it. He will start, his body hair will go away, as he seems, he gets this big, fat, beer belly going. His testosterone's going to go down. He's going to lose his body hair. He'll start growing. He'll start accumulating fat in his chest, in his pectoral muscles. Get man boobs, okay? It's not that funny, and he won't be able to have sex anymore, which is really kind of interesting. So there are a lot of medications, and of course this is one of the things you have to ask your physician when they give you, if they give you a medication, what will this do to my sex drive? You know, it's one of the things you need to talk about. But of course alcohol, crystal meth, of course, is supposed to increase your sex drive. Cocaine will also increase your sex drive in the beginning. But as the more you use, the less it works that way. So in the end, of course, you have no sex drive after using crystal meth and cocaine. In the beginning, you're using it as an aphrodisiac. Potentially, you're using it as an aphrodisiac. But the more you use, the less functional it is as an aphrodisiac. Other specified sexual dysfunction is available as category to include dysfunctions that do not meet other disorders' criteria. For example, sexual aversion disorder it was a disorder in the DSM-4. We don't use it anymore because it doesn't happen very often. Sexual aversion disorder was somebody that was afraid of sex. Really doesn't happen very often anymore. We live in a society that we are confronted with sexuality in our cartoons that our kids watch. Anywhere. Within our cartoons, SpongeBob SquarePants has a girlfriend. It's a squirrel, but it's still a girlfriend. You know, all of this stuff. You know, we're confronted with sexuality in most of our lives. So we have the amount of sexual repression we have in the world is much lower than it used to be once upon a long time ago. There are a variety of effective psychotherapies. Behavioral and cognitive behavioral approaches produce solid outcomes for people with these problems. There is a clear and concerning trend toward medicalization of the sexual dysfunctions. The exclusive push to market and prescribe very profitable new medications that provide temporary symptom relief will indirectly hinder the development and the use of effective psychotherapy. So you're pretty much better off not taking any of the drugs. All the drugs have side effects. Viagra, Cialis, and Levitra all have side effects that will change. I mean, right now it's allowing you to have sex, but eventually, the more you take these drugs, it lowers your sex drive. It actually lowers your sex drive. It makes it possible that the individual can have sex, but it actually does lower their sex drive eventually. Okay, now we're going to talk about some of the nasty stuff. These are the people that are out there. They're out there, okay? The paraphilic disorders are people that have different ideas of what is sexy and what's not sexy. Paraphilic disorders are disorders in which the disturbance concerns a focus or the target of sexual desire. Pedophilia is a good example. Why in the world would this individual want to have sex with a child? Does that make any logical sense? Is there any common sense to having sex with a 18-month-old or whatever? A number of years ago, they found a tape out in the middle of the desert. It was like 15 miles out of Las Vegas. They found this tape, and they put the tape in the DVR and they played it. And it was a man having sex with an 18-month-old. And it lasted for like 90 minutes. This man having sex with an 18-month-old. And the problem was they didn't see the guy's face. And they couldn't identify him, but they saw the little girl's face, and they saw the clothes that she was wearing in the beginning, and the clothes that were, of course, but he had sex with her for 90 minutes, as you can imagine. So everybody was up in arms. This was, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. Everybody was up in arms, and they couldn't figure out who the little girl was. They were afraid that maybe she'd been murdered. That's a possibility. So they had a national movement trying to find this little girl. And they identified her by the outfit that she was wearing. She was wearing an outfit. They knew when it was because there was a time, there was a date stamp on it. And they figured out that she was wearing an outfit from Walmart. And not all the Walmarts in the United States have the same outfits. So they were able to localize it to a Walmart in Las Vegas. Once they did that, they were able to identify the little girl. By this time, she was 3 years old, 3 or 4 years old. So they went to the little girl to find out how much damage had been done. They found out that there was no physical damage done to the little girl. And psychologically, she was only 18 months old. So she didn't even have verbal skills at this point. Hardly any verbal skills. So they did a psychological evaluation. And what they discovered was that she had no memory of this incident at all. As you can imagine, as an 18-month-old, what are you thinking about? You know, how in the world are you categorizing this? In your brain, how are you categorizing it? And she just had no way of doing it. So there was no problem. There was no continuing problem for the child. But of course, they also identified the guy. They were able to identify the guy. Once they identified the little girl, they were able to identify the guy. He took off. He was somebody from Las Vegas. He'd been a friend of this lady's. She had to go to the DMV or something, and so he watched her for 2 hours, and of course he molested her. Well, and it was the only time that she was. They were boyfriend, girlfriend, kind of. They were kind of seeing each other. Okay, I know it's an ugly, ugly story, but eventually, of course, they broke up, and he didn't mess with the little girl anymore. But they identified who the guy was. He took off. And they caught him in Texas, so everything's okay. They arrested him, threw him in jail for a really long period of time. He had a gun in his mouth when they arrested him, and of course, since he had a gun, they couldn't. I know they wanted him to shoot himself, but he never did. He didn't shoot himself, and eventually, of course, they put him in jail for an extended length of time. Anyway, that's pedophilia. Pedophilia is just one of the paraphilias. Diagnostic criteria for paraphilic disorders describe intense and recurrent sexual fantasies, sexual urges, or sexual behaviors involving objects, children, non-consenting persons, or suffering and humiliation. These are the paraphilic disorders. The fantasies or stimuli may be necessary to become sexually aroused, or their use may be episodic. In other words, they don't have to do this every time. Some individuals, they can only get sexually excited if they have their paraphilic object around them, whatever that may happen to be. But other individuals, they can have normal sex at other times without any problem. Paraphilic disorders involving children or non-consenting persons are criminal offenses in addition to mental disorders. So a lot of these paraphilic disorders, there's no problem here. You can, if you have to have a rubber something stuck up your nose, or you want to lick somebody's eyeball. If you have to lick somebody's eyeball in order to get sexually excited, then, you know, is that against the law, licking people's eyeballs? The answer is, of course, no, it's not. It's not against the law. I don't think it is. Who comes up with this stuff? Licking somebody's eyeball? I don't know. All of the paraphilia, all of a sudden you've got their contact lenses on This is no laughing matter. I can't see out of my left ear. Okay, maybe it is. All the paraphilic disorders are much more common among men than they are among women. The prevalence of paraphilic disorders in the population is not well documented. They are believed to be underdiagnosed, of course, because who talks about this stuff? I don't know. You know, you got friends, and they're telling you, you know, that banana looks awfully good. Huh? Are you gonna take him to the hospital, you know, to the emergency room? This guy's got a fetish about bananas. I don't know. Probably not. So there's probably a lot more of these things out there than we think there are. Approximately 50% of those seen clinically are married. So these individuals, they are able to have normal sex, theoretically, usually, in most cases. The defining pattern of exhibitionistic disorder is the recurrent fantasy, urge, or behavior of exposing of one's genitals to an unsuspecting stranger. There was a football player, Lance, what was his last name? Lance Allworth. He played for, he was amazing. He could make, if he got the ball on his fingertips, this guy could make the catch. I mean, he was just amazing. A little bitty guy. His name is Lance Allworth. He played for the Chargers, who were in San Diego at the time, and he also played for the Cowboys at the end of his career. But he had this problem. He'd been arrested several times, and the NFL they were trying to decide what they were going to do with him. Anyway, eventually he got put in prison, and he stopped playing for the Cowboys because he was in prison. But they turned a blind eye to this guy because he was doing these kinds of odd things. These fantasies, urges, or actions are experienced as sexually arousing and persist over a period of at least 6 months. Specifiers can be used to indicate whether the target was pre-pubertal, children, physically mature individuals, or both. A lot of these individuals, it's almost pedophilia because the people that they exposed themselves to are children. So of course these individuals would become would go on the sex offenders list, and they wouldn't be allowed to be around elementary schools. But some of these individuals are exposing themselves to older individuals, to very old individuals, like nursing homes and whatnot. Additional DSM-5 specifiers in a controlled environment, opportunities to expose are limited and in full remission, symptom-free for 5 or more years. In other words, in order not to have this problem, you have to not be doing it for 5 years.
Just a question about all of these disorders in general.
Yeah.
Are they disorders because they're against the law, or are they disorders because there's something wrong with the person?
The idea is that there's something wrong with the person. And some of these are against the law because they are encroaching, flashing at some little kid.
Are any of these disorders not lewd?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean the one about licking eyeballs is not illegal. You can do that. I know. I know. But if it was somebody, if it was somebody that you had to knock out in order to do this to, but the person had to be unconscious, you think I'm kidding? I mean, there are people that have these problems. They knock people out, and they'll go up and they'll prop their eyeball open, and then they'll lick their eyeball. Well, that's assault. Obviously, that's assault. So if it has to be somebody that doesn't want their eyeball licked, then that's a problem. That's against the law.
So what makes it a disorder then?
I'm sorry?
What makes one person's, I guess, sexual preference or...
When it's like a compulsion, like they can't control themselves.
And this is really kind of an interesting problem. I mean, we have S&M people that are sadomasochists. The one person would be a sadist, the other person would be a masochist. Dominatrix, the whole idea of dominatrix. The lady is denigrating the man. She does all kinds of horrible things to this guy. Well, she wants to do it because she's a sadist, and he wants to have it done to him because he's a masochist. Is that against the law? No. With 2 consenting adults, it's okay. They have a problem in England. They have this thing. The English used to have all these private schools, which they call public schools. I know they're backwards and upside down. But and they were all male schools, and they were all female schools. So the guys, while they were growing up, they were being punished, and the way they were being punished was by being paddled. Okay, so you've got these guys that while they're going through puberty, they're being paddled and they find it sexually exciting. So we had this whole group of individuals, these British diplomats and these very important British people that wanted to be spanked in various one way or another. Sometimes it was a riding crop, sometimes it was a paddle, but they wanted women to do this. So they hired prostitutes to paddle them, and that's how they became sexually excited, was by being spanked.
Just you mentioned earlier that a lot of them are married.
Right.
So, I mean, suggest that they also have I guess, a quote-unquote normal sex life
Right.
outside of that. So
Right. Potential.
What makes that kind of activity or interest a disorder? Where does it cross the line?
If it bothers, if it disturbs them in some way. Like if this guy had to visit a prostitute in order to be spanked because his wife wouldn't do it. You know, if he doesn't tell his wife because he's embarrassed by it, but so he has to hire a prostitute to spank him in order for him to get sexually excited. So when he has sex with his wife, what does he think about? Well, he's the lady spanking him. Now that's a disorder because he's got a problem. If it was in the sanctity of his own home and his wife were spanking him, would it be a disorder? Probably not. We wouldn't consider it.
So if they change the laws and made prostitution legal, like in Las Vegas or in Nevada,
right,
a brothel, then it's not a disorder?
Well, I mean, it's still a disorder in England or Germany where prostitution is legal. It's still a disorder if it's bothering you, if it disturbs you. So that's the real bottom line. Is it still a paraphilia? Yeah, it's still a paraphilia. So what's normal sexual reaction? I know. I know. That's the problem. That's really the basic problem. Will all this stuff change? Yeah, we're going to talk about transvestitism, dressing like the opposite sex. Is that normal or is that abnormal? Well, now we have transgender people. Is that normal or is that abnormal? Well, it's legal, certainly legal. They can change genders if they want. They can dress like the opposite sex if they want. People can do that. Is this a problem? Well, in the old days, remember, homosexuality used to be considered a paraphilia. It was considered an abnormality. Gender confusion. But it's not anymore. So these things change over time. So potentially this can go away. The fact that it's against the law, homosexuality used to be against the law in the United States. Now we have, gay people can marry. But, it's only been that way for, 5 or 6 years, I guess. So it really all depends. I mean, as things change, maybe eyeball licking will become normal. Instead of kissing each other on the cheek, we'll start licking each other's eyeballs. I don't know. I don't know.
Just as is currently.
I know. Exactly, okay. Yeah, and that's the problem. Exhibition, but this isn't normal. Displaying yourself to children. However, what if you went to a nudist camp or a nudist beach? Everybody's naked. But are you getting sexually excited by displaying yourself to other individuals? The answer is no. Not if you're on a nudist beach. Otherwise, you're embarrassed, I would imagine.
No, you just answered my question.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have to get sexually excited. This has to do with sex. Exhibitionistic disorder is one of the most common sexual offenses reported to the police in the United States. Onset is usually before age 18 and may decrease in the incidence as one ages. Incidence is not known, but unlikely to be higher than 2 to 4% of the male population. Okay, so what if somebody urinates on the side of a building and somebody sees them doing it? It's obviously a male if he's peeing on the side of the building. Right? Is that exhibitionism? Is it?
No.
Yeah. Well, if somebody sees them. he's urinating, whether he's drunk or not, really doesn't make any difference. However, in Germany, has anybody ever been to Germany? Volksmarch? Yeah, have you been on a Volksmarch? They'll just squat right there in the middle of the trail. You know, ladies, guys, it really doesn't matter. They just whip it up. As a matter of fact, the interesting thing, my wife, when she first got to Germany, she had to drive from Zweibrücken on the Autobahn. She had to drive from Zweibrücken to Ramstein. Ramstein is where the USAFE headquarters is. So she was driving there, and there's a German army base right on the other side of Ramstein. So this whole truckload of German soldiers had stopped on the side of the road, and these guys were in the ditch, urinating in the ditch, as my wife was driving by. And we're all just waving at her, you know, holding on to their penises as they were urinating. You know, in Germany, this is normal behavior. You know, it's every Thursday night is nude swimming at the Schwimmbad. If you are a swimmer, I can't swim, but you go to the Schwimmbad on Thursday night. I know. So is that normal? Is that abnormal? I mean, that's the question. In the United States, nude swimming is probably skinny dipping. Is that legal? Can you do that? If you're caught naked in the water?
Probably just depends on like if you're in the privacy of your own. We failed.
Wait a minute, I was just at the hotel, they had an indoor pool. Is it okay if I go skinny dipping in the indoor pool? There was no, it didn't say that on the sign. You could,
What the heck?
that you had to wear a swimming suit. No, I'd probably be arrested for indecent exposure. Okay, so what's happening here? The individual is frequently introverted and quietly appropriate in ordinary social relationships. Exhibitionistic disorder may be associated with significant impairment. In a study of 25 males with the disorder, over 90% had comorbid conditions including depression, substance abuse, and other personality disorders. Yes, sir.
So some of this behavior that you're talking about, does all depend on the intent then? Like the intent, like if it's
Right.
Like an emergency, you know?
Yeah,
Not something you would normally do when you
Right.
go and you're trying to hide it and
Yeah,
you get caught.
yeah. You got to pee really, really, really bad. And so, you know, you jump out of your car and you're starting to urinate and somebody.
And it's not the same thing.
Probably not.
Simon Bush.
Probably not. As long as it's not a cop, you're probably okay.
I actually know a guy, I knew this guy, I know him in Phoenix. He was at a bar. He had got a DUI before. And so he would walk to the nearest bar and he would drink a little. He would walk home
Oh,
to avoid.
no. I know where this is going.
Yeah, and so and in between was a school zone. There was this area. And there was a dumpster. They have these walls like this in the dumpster. And he went back in between behind the dumpster. The cops saw him. They were on bikes. And they went back there and he's like, yeah, you know, I couldn't make it home and I didn't want to kill myself. And he actually now has registered as sex offender.
Because it was a
It happened in a school zone.
school zone.
This was like
He-
a name.
It was probably like around 2 in the morning. He said bars closed
Right.
at 1. So he's walking home.
What's the fatality?
Yeah. His boss had to go to his trial to hear everything, and
Oh,
then,
jeez.
so his boss said, "I hope you never do anything stupid to get fired, because no one else is going to hire you." So he kept his job, but he had to register as a sex offender.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
What a sad, sad story. Did you write this down? Oh, man. Okay. Infectious disorders, sexual interest becomes focused on non-living objects. The DSM-5 diagnosis can be specified by object, body part, non-living objects, or others. If you look at the list, and I've given you a list on a couple pages here. Wait a minute. Where is it? It's somewhere. Anyway, There's a Wikipedia page, it's got like, I don't know, 500 of these damn things. One of them has to do with being sexually excited by amputations. Yeah, so you're only sexually excited if somebody has a missing limb or finger or something. I know.
What about being called daddy? Or this?
Daddy? That's normal though, isn't it?
You're on TMI.
That's just a word. I don't think that's a fetish.
Talk about after class.
It can be a body part or other non-living or a non-living object. Fetishistic disorder is a recurrent, intense, sexually arousing fantasy, urges or behaviors to use objects in sexual contexts. Most commonly, a fetish object becomes a required or strongly preferred aspect of sexual functioning. And of course, now you've got to find a partner that will agree to utilize whatever this object happens to be, or to cut off an arm or whatever. It all depends. I can't get excited unless I lick somebody's eyeball. You know, if that's the way it works, then that's the way it works, I guess. In its absence, males may experience erectile difficulties, and of course this can be a problem as far as sex is concerned.
So does the act have to somehow be sexually gratifying to the person?
Yeah.
So in a situation where sexual gratification isn't the primary motive, like say prison rape or stuff like that, where it's more about power,
Right.
is that something different, or is it?
Yeah, it's something totally different. When we talk about rapes, and of course we're not going to talk about rapes in here, but when we diagnose a rapist, when we try to profile them, one of the things we're looking at is what type of rape is it? Is it a power rape? Is it a destructive rape? Are they trying to injure the individual? Are they trying to just show power on this with this select individual? You know, that has a lot to do with how we profile these select individuals. And of course, once you start profiling rapists, it gets really pretty ugly.
Is sodomy considered a disorder?
No. Some states used to have sodomy as it was against the law for sodomy. Sodomy includes any non-genital intercourse. So oral sex, anal sex was considered sodomy. And in some states, mostly southern states, that was against the law. But of course, it's not considered a fetish now. That type of intercourse isn't considered a fetish. Okay? All right. What are we doing here? Oh my God. Okay, this is Polly. Polly's a 32-year-old single male. He admitted being somewhat sexually attracted to women. What he was far more attracted to was their panties, their underwear. Polly remembered first becoming sexually excited when he was a 7-year-old and saw a pornographic picture of topless women in their panties. While the focus was supposed to be on their exposed breasts, Polly focused on their lingerie. His first ejaculation occurred at 13 via masturbation to fantasies of women wearing panties. He masturbated into his older sister's panties and would steal the panties of her friends and other women that he met socially. He would go to parties and find an excuse to wander into bedrooms where he would rifle through the drawers until he found the occupant's underwear drawer. He would masturbate into the panties and then put them in plastic bags. He preferred panties washed in Tide and would find excuses to visit women who used this type of detergent. I've known several of these individuals, and I've put them all together, and that is Polly. One of these individuals was on another reservation. Women couldn't dry their underwear on the line because if they did, he would steal them. Yeah, he would steal their underwear. And he was caught a couple times in people's houses masturbating on their beds, which was a little interesting and strange. But everybody knew him, so everybody liked him, and nobody wanted to get him in trouble. So nobody turned him in, and of course this had been going on for years, and then finally he did something stupid. He broke into, when he started breaking into people's houses, when he started breaking the doors down or sneaking in the windows. And normally there wasn't anybody home. And as long as there wasn't anybody home, nobody said anything about it. Anyway, the other individual, this guy was hooked on Tide. I mean, it was the smell of Tide. I don't know. It was just a little bit weird. And he was a panty stealer too. Yeah. Yes, sir.
You mentioned part of his activity was masturbation. Is masturbation considered one of these disorders?
No, it's normal. No, it's considered.
Change the subject slightly. I had another question going back one to the pedophilia.
Right.
At what point does it cross into pedophilia?
That's an interesting question. We're going to talk more about pedophilia in just a second. And all your questions should be answered.
Okay.
As far as that's concerned. As far as masturbation is concerned, it's considered that 100% of males masturbate. So you can take that to the bank if you like. So this is very common behavior as far as males are concerned. And it's a relatively high number of females. I haven't seen any figures lately, but it's like 100% for males.
Have you ever had a class where nobody laughed over this totally thing? Really?
In Mississippi. It was bad. All these little southern males were just sitting there. They were trying not to smile or even laugh. Oh, it was bad. It was all women. I didn't have any men. It was bad. And I kept cracking jokes, and boy, I'll tell you what, they didn't crack us out. It's kind of like Chris not cracking us out. Voyeuristic disorder is an intense sexual arousal from touching or rubbing against a non-consenting person, persisting for at least 6 months. Diagnosis can be made if the individual has committed the act or if the urges and fantasies cause distress or impairment. Voyeuristic disorder usually begins in adolescence and peaks between the ages of 15 and 25 before becoming less frequent. Voyeuristic acts such as inappropriate touching occur in almost one-third of the male population, but the incidence of the disorder is assumed to be much lower than that, perhaps below 10%. This is a really serious problem in Japan, where it's really, really crowded. Geez, how can I talk about this? The females wear uniforms to school, elementary school uniforms, junior high uniforms. They wear their uniforms. And what they'll do is they'll take their that didn't sound right. The clothes that they have worn, and they'll package them up and they'll sell them on eBay. As odd as that seems. And this has become a really serious problem. I mean, they're selling their uniforms. That's one thing, but for a lot more money, of course. But the other problem is that men and these aren't young adult men. These are very adult men. These are men in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. These are important Japanese businessmen are going on getting on the subway and yeah, this is a really serious problem.
They were like in vending machines at one point too.
Yeah. Oh, with their It's only in Japan. We don't have any vending machines in the United States with soiled underwear. I know. Okay. So it's a little bit different. This is a really serious problem there. It's not so much of a problem in the United States. We live in, we have a lot more room. We don't rub up against each other. I told you the story about when I was on the subway in Japan. I got on the subway and I had all these Japanese stewardesses. You know the story. I got all these Japanese stewardesses. And they're all rubbing up against me, and I'm trying. trying not to touch anybody. I didn't want to molest anybody, but I mean, they're pressed right up against me. You know, standing lap dance. It was different. It was different, but they were used to that kind of thing, and of course I wasn't, so I was all scared and whatnot. I didn't want to.
Have you ever been to France?
Yeah.
Is it crowded in France too? No, it's not.
No.
I've always been curious about French people. I've never been to France either. I just noticed their mannerism is different too. They don't know how to stand in a line.
They don't. Oh, the Germans are bad at it too. Not only that, but they get really close to you. I mean, really close to you. And if they can't touch you, then it's not close enough. You know, I'm from Indiana. This is about it for me. Yeah. But the French, wow, they're right up in your face. It's really kind of interesting.
So that density in population, does that affect people sometimes?
Well, it does in Asia. You know, they rub up against each other all the time. They don't think anything about it. Being from Indiana, where the area that I like to maintain is a lot larger, you know, having all those women that close to me is really unnerving. The Japanese stories. Cute little things too, I'll tell you. They'd just been on a flight, 18-hour flight, and they were all sweaty, so it was kind of an interesting situation. Anyway, so here I am, I'm trying to keep from touching anybody. You know, I didn't want to have all of a sudden a Freudianistic disorder. I survived. I know, pedophilic disorder. Okay, pedophilia. Involves intense sexual arousal to prepubescent children, which persists for at least 6 months. Diagnosis requires a person has either acted on these urges or is distressed or impaired by the urges or fantasies. How in the world do we find out about it? Normally these individuals will get arrested doing something stupid. Sometimes they just turn themselves in and say, hey, look, I've been having these horrible, horrible fantasies about SpongeBob or the person must be at least 16 years of age and must be 5 years or more older than the child. So there's the answer to your question. So they have to be at least 5 years older. So an 18-year-old could get arrested for a 13-year-old. There was just a case of a 45-year-old, a guy from Pennsylvania, picked up the 16-year-old. Yeah, picked her up. And he took her down to Mexico, didn't he?
Was he a teacher or a principal?
No, he was her neighbor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he was 45 and she was 16. And evidently he'd been doing this for a couple of years. So the question is, what's the age of consent in Pennsylvania? And the answer is 16. So he took her away at just at the right age. I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen. They were looking for them all over the United States. They thought that he had kidnapped her, but as it turned out, she was a consenting.
I think they charged him with interference with custody.
That may be good. Okay, good.
And she was under 18.
Yeah. Okay, so there's the answer to that question. I had sex with a 16-year-old once, but I was 18 at the time, so I guess I'm okay. I think I'm okay. And I married the lady eventually, so I guess that's it. What was his confession? Which is tragic. Okay, so it wasn't pedophilia. Subtypes: exclusive sexual attraction limited to children. These individuals aren't sexually excited by mature individuals. Non-exclusive sexual attraction has included adults. We see this a lot with individuals that have families. So they will produce a family. And potentially, hopefully, they don't molest their own children, but sometimes they'll molest other people's children. Jerry Sandusky in Pennsylvania, Penn State, had a family. His son was just arrested for exactly the same crime that Jerry Sandusky went to jail for. So maybe it runs in the family. I'm sorry?
Can it be genetic?
I don't know. And we're going to talk about that. Where in the world does this come from? Limited to incest, in other words, you only have sex with your own children. Victim category, sexually attracted to males, sexually attracted to females, sexually attracted to both. These can be pedophiles. Some are only attracted to females, and some are only attracted to males. Diagnosis is complicated by the fact that the behavior is criminal, of course, and mandatory reporting laws require that, with few exceptions, notification of legal authorities. We had the problem with the Mormon, what was that guy's name? That Mormon guy that ran that group up in on the Arizona border. What was his name? Flake? No, that wasn't his name. That's the name of your senator. What was his name?
What, Jeff?
Jeff Warren.
No, Jeff.
Jeff Warren? Jeff Warren?
Flake? Is it Jeff Flake?
No, Flake is your senator.
Jeff, where?
He was on the Utah.
Warren. Jeff Warren.
Jeff Warren, yeah. He was on the Utah, Arizona border. Yeah, evidently he was having sex with 14-year-old girls, I guess, or something. Anyway, he's in jail now. Okay, so what's going on? Legal authorities. The course tends to be more chronic, and the relapse rates appear to be higher in those who are attracted to males. And I can tell you this for a fact, when I was working with an individual in Ohio, we were looking at all these cases trying to decide if these individuals could be released from prison. It was a tough one. And almost all the individuals that we kept in prison were attracted to males, weren't attracted to females. If they're attracted to females, usually what we saw was an individual that was also attracted to adult females. But if it was males, a lot of times it was just like 5-year-old boys or 7-year-old boys. We had a case in Nebraska when I was living in Nebraska. They had a kid from the Air Force Base was kidnapping blonde-headed 12-year-old boys and murdering and raping them. And he was able to murder and rape 3 individuals. He liked boys on bicycles, as strange as that may seem, but he snatched 3 boys off of bicycles and murdered them. And he was on the base, and that we got real over.
Are most pedophiles, people who suffer from pedophilia, are they males?
Yeah. It does happen with females, but not really. And usually if it happens to females, they usually is their own child. But we have seen teachers that are attracted to young
I know there's teachers, if it's a female teacher,
yeah.
and especially if she's attractive, it's almost accepted. People don't even...
It's happened like 3 times last year in Florida. So
people seem to accept it more.
I don't know. Maybe they don't mind seeing young boys having sex with older women, but they don't like seeing older men having sex with younger women. I don't know. Maybe it's just more socially acceptable. Just a thought. I guess it all depends. We have that lady that saw that kid in the 3rd grade and fell in love with him. And by the time he was in, the 5th or 6th grade, she had his baby. Eventually, of course, they arrested her when she got pregnant. She was married to somebody else. So she divorced her husband, and as soon as this kid turned 18, she married him. But they just got a divorce not very long ago. So, I don't know. Odd cases. Male sex offenders tend to have lower IQ scores than non-offenders. Among sex offenders, those who sexually abuse children have lower scores than offenders of adults. And of course, I've got some statistics in a minute. One of the reasons I put these pictures up here is because this really pisses a lot of people off. So I put angry people. It doesn't have anything to do with pedophiles. It just has to do with
Samuel Jackson.
Samuel L. Jackson is pretty. He's certainly not a